Hello. We are glad you're with us tonight. Oh man, I did not realize what a good-looking man I've become. We're we're glad to have you with us tonight. We're going to be talking about the 1960s, but I need to do some uh, paperwork here. It's not really paperwork, but let you know what the schedule is happening. And honestly, in my life, I'm I'm starting to get bombarded, and it's my own fault. So we will be here this week and talk about the 60s. We will be here next week, which is March 6th, and talk about the 60s. But on March 13th, it's school board meeting, and so I'll be attending the school board meeting. As you know, I'm running for school board, and I'm trying to, if the people of Orangeville are crazy enough to elect me, I'd like to land and know what I'm doing. So I'm going to be attending school board meetings. And then on the 20th of March, I'm on the Desert View Credit Union Board of Directors. I haven't advertised that much, but I am. And there's a training once a year that I have to go to. So we won't have it the 20th. So we'll go next week. We'll skip 2 weeks and be back on the 27th. And I'll put that schedule probably later tonight on Facebook. If you miss any of these, you can catch them on YouTube now. From now on, we're not putting them on Facebook, we're putting them on YouTube. And they're all recorded and they're there, and you can go in and watch them, and it's better recordings. So that's what we're trying for. So I hope everybody that's watching this live tonight is getting all of that. I'll repeat that. We'll be here next week, miss the next 2 weeks, and be back on the 27th of March. Okay? Okay, and again, more and more things are kind of crowding in on me a little bit. And there's that one thing Gwen says that I should have learned when I was younger, and I never did learn it. And that's to say no. So I apologize right off the bat. Okay, well, I'm excited. Oh, people, hello? Hi, Callie. Oh, it's Caleb. Caleb, congratulations. Caleb got 85% on his test. My grandson called me up last night and says, Grandpa, can you tell me about A Midsummer Night's Dream, which I taught Shakespeare for years and years and years. So last night he was learning about A Midsummer Night's Dream because he had this big test today. And congratulations, Caleb, he got 85% on it. So that's great.
We went away to see our granddaughter Peyton. She was in a play of a heroine night, and it was Midsummer Night's Dream. It was the most boring thing I've ever.
What? Oh my golly. Well, then they're doing it wrong, because that should be the funniest, best play ever. And I believe that Shakespeare is always better if you cut about half of it out. So it just works better. Okay, we're talking about the 1960s. I hope this is recording that way and not backwards. Well, maybe it's backwards. I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing.
It's okay, Neil.
It is okay?
On the screen.
Well, yeah, but it's on the camera. Oh, wait, now you guys are, if I hit that button, then it's on you. What does that look like?
President Kennedy
G.I. Joe.
G.I. Joe.
Mick Jagger.
Mick Jagger.
Yep.
Jimi Hendrix. Jimi Hendrix. And who's that? Arm something.
Neil Armstrong.
Neil, we got it right. But Buzz was with him. Michael wasn't. He was still up in there. Okay, that's what we're going to be talking about. Now, we're first going to talk about the political side of things. And many of you here will remember some of this stuff and can straighten me out. And I'm happy to have you do that, because when the 60s started, I was 3. And it wasn't a big event for me. But for some of you, you probably remember 1960 fairly well. Okay, and you can help me here, please. I enjoy your comments. Okay. Up to this point, relations, us and Russia had gotten better. And the reason was, kick the bucket. He was gone. And Khrushchev came in and said, we're going to go with more openness. We're going to be more open. And then he clamped down like crazy on Hungary when they tried to be more open. So we kind of didn't know how to take Khrushchev, but overall our relations with Russia had calmed down a little bit until this event in 1960. And what had happened is President Eisenhower had scheduled a Paris Peace Summit for May. And Eisenhower and Khrushchev were going to meet together and even try to make relations better, okay? Then Eisenhower had been invited by Khrushchev and had accepted to go to Russia in June. So things are looking pretty good. And then this happens. The U-2 spy plane. We were doing flights over Russia, over Russian airspace. We were spying on them. Now, Air Force? No. CIA was running this program. The CIA was running this program. And the CIA has grown pretty big for their britches by this time. They have tried and succeeded sometimes in overthrowing other world leaders. They overthrew the democratically elected leader of Iran, and had put in their man. And they had tried it in other places too. The CIA was pretty big for their britches. And they were running these overflights. Now, what does anybody know about the U-2 spy plane?
I think they made a song.
It wasn't fast enough. We had faster planes. SR-71 was a lot faster, the Blackbird. Lots faster. But this one had a particular ability in that is it could fly high. It could be up there so high, and then it had cameras on it that we could see what they were loading on ships down in Russian harbors. We could see that. And they're flying up there, I don't quite know how high, 70,000? Close to 100,000 feet in the air.
They had to dress warm, because I had a cousin.
They had to dress warm. It's cold up there. So, one of these is flying over, taking pictures of Russia. And the Russians have a missile that can fly that high, and they shoot it down. And here it is, and it crashes. And the pilot disobeys orders. His name was Francis Gary Powers. And he disobeyed orders. Do you know what his orders were from the CIA? if you get shot down, die. Do not be captured. Well, funny thing, he didn't want to die. So he bailed out and he was captured. And the word started to get out, and President Eisenhower goes to the CIA and says, literally, are we spying on Russia? Are we flying over Russia? There's accusations of this. And the CIA said, no, we don't know what they're talking about. But we think what was shot down was a weather airplane that was checking weather that got off course. They were lying to the President of the United States. So he goes to this summit. And when he hits the summit, he doesn't know that they've got the wreckage. President Eisenhower doesn't. And he doesn't know they have Francis Gary Powers. And so they meet at the summit, and Khrushchev says, you're spying on us. And Eisenhower says, I completely deny that we're spying. We did have an airplane veer off course that was a weather airplane, but you don't have any proof that we were spying on you. And Khrushchev says, how about the camera? Oh, how about the airplane? How about the pilot who admitted they were spying on us? You were spying on us. And Khrushchev produces these, and Eisenhower looks like an idiot to the whole world. And Khrushchev comes off as pretty savvy, pretty powerful.
And what were the repercussions for the CIA?
They had to be sneakier. You may remember when Eisenhower left office in 1961, as he left office, just before that, he gave a speech. Does anybody remember the title of that speech? It was called the Military Industrial Complex. And he said, the president isn't running this country, Congress isn't running this country. The military industrial complex that wants to create more and more and more weapons, and the CIA right there hand in hand with them are running this country. And we've got to not let that happen. That's got to stop. And when did they finally get that stopped? Yeah. Okay, so this is Francis Gary Powers. This was a huge black eye for America, horribly embarrassing, and especially for Eisenhower. Okay, but 1960, that's an election year. And the election of 1960 actually began to pit a couple of younger people at that time against each other. Imagine that, young people running for president. Anyway, John F. Kennedy, a senator from Massachusetts, the youngest man ever to run for president of the United States, 42 years old when he runs. We'd actually had, Teddy Roosevelt was younger when he became president, but he became president because of an assassination. But to actually run for president was John F. Kennedy, and the vice president of the he gets Johnson to run as his vice president. I don't know if that was a wise decision, a poor decision. You probably have your own opinions on it. Anybody have an opinion on it?
He shouldn't have went to Dallas.
There was a man who warned Kennedy not to go to Dallas, said, do not go to Dallas, it's not safe. And that was Lyndon Johnson.
I heard that Kennedy needed to win Texas in order to get the,
To be sure, because, and I'm going to show you on a map why he had to carry Texas. Because this is not just a two-man race. And he needs not just to win Texas, but he's got to have a Southerner. Can dancers. They were both televised and broadcast on radio. And we've studied this election like crazy because it's the first one where debates are televised. And people can sit in their living room and watch the two presidential candidates. And that's exciting. And they made this great discovery. People who watched it on TV, a majority of them felt Kennedy won the debates. Those who watched it on TV. Those who listened on the radio, overwhelmingly, the majority said Nixon won the debates. Yeah, go ahead.
Charisma.
Charisma, looks.
Yeah.
Body language, all of those things. But as far as maybe logic and reasoning, Nixon was winning. As far as charisma is concerned, Kennedy was winning. And that's what this kind of comes down to. Okay. And this is how it turns out. Up to that point, is so that there's not so much squabbling and so forth. So when it came to the Electoral College, Kennedy defeated Nixon, but that was still pretty close. And they've studied this election, and it comes down to a few counties in Illinois. If those counties in Illinois had gone over to Nixon instead of Kennedy, it makes enough of a change that Kennedy probably loses. And so they've studied this to death. They've studied it a lot. What do you notice by looking at this map? A lot of red. That's Nixon. Nixon wins the West, right? Except Nevada. Nevada goes for Kennedy. Where does Kennedy win? He does win Texas. And all the South except
Florida.
he doesn't win Florida. What's happening in the 1960s in Florida that changes this? Okay, but Cuba is, there's hundreds of thousands of escaped Cubans who are living in Florida. And who do they vote for? They vote for the anti-communist. They vote for Nixon. Okay, so there's that. But how about this? Look at this. Do it. 5 and Byrd got 6. We had 14 votes, and then one elector in Oklahoma, they got 8 electors. 7 of them went for Nixon. 1 said, I'm voting for Byrd, and committed to vote for Byrd. So Byrd got, in the whole thing, he got 0.7% of the vote, but he got 15 electoral votes. And that's, Kennedy could see this coming. With Byrd campaigning in the South, he had to hang on to the South. So getting Johnson, hopefully not only gave him Texas, which he did, but tied the South back to the Democratic Party as much as he could, losing, of course, Virginia, where Byrd was from, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Florida. This was a crazy tight election. This was a crazy, really tight election. Why would Harry Byrd run for president? What was his platform?
States' rights.
That's what he said a lot. Keep states' rights. What rights?
What rights do they want in Mississippi?
What rights?
Racist rights.
Segregation is what they were talking about. He was campaigning, calling it states' rights, when what he meant was, why should we follow what the Supreme Court says? This is about states' rights, and it's our right to segregate our population. And that's what he was running on segregation. That's a little bit scary, and that's going to encourage other people to run later, like in 1968, when Wallace runs for president. Okay? What a crazy election, a tight election. Now, I just want to say, Nixon lost, and it crushed him. This really was a crushing blow to Nixon. He, I don't know if any of you remember that he had a little bit of an ego. Yeah, he had a huge ego. And this crushed him, and he went home to California and he pouted. And his wife, Pat, she said, come on, the people here in California still love you, right? The people here in California still love you. Get back on your feet and let's do this. And so at the next gubernatorial election, Nixon runs for governor of California and loses. And his wife says, come on. And he says, shut up, Pat. I'm done. Now we know he wasn't. But he really went into a very serious time of depression. He was discouraged. He had gone from vice president of the United States running for president to being defeated, and then being defeated for the governor of California. But he'll come back. You know that. to negotiate. And also in that inaugural address, he said, and I really like this, let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and the success of liberty. That was a pretty cool statement. That was a pretty cool statement. Let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and the success of liberty. Later, as he was gearing up and kicking up the space race, he said this in a speech: "We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard." Now, he was a pretty inspiring president. He was young, he was intense, he was smart, he was a Harvard educated author, he'd been an author. He came from old money, well, semi-old money. His dad had made his money running liquor, but by the time Kennedy got it, it was older money. And he was handsome, tall and handsome, and a war hero. He had saved. That was you guys. Anybody tell us what you felt about this when he became president of the United States?
It was Camelot.
It was Camelot.
It was so awesome. It was
What does his wife immediately set about doing?
Fixing up the White House.
She remodeled and redecorated the entire White House. And then was happy to take Walter Cronkite and anybody else who wanted to go through and see it. She was extremely fashionable. And she had a great eye. She was a photographer for fashion magazines. And she had a great eye for fashion and for dressing. And it was something new. It wasn't Harry Truman, Dwight Eisenhower anymore. It was something new.
Just had a question.
You
These
bet.
quotes that Kennedy is famous for, was that his own thing or is that his speechwriter?
Kennedy never had a problem taking credit for what his speechwriters wrote. But
He was smart.
he had some very good speechwriters. And in fact, he wrote his book. His book was published while he was at Harvard, called Profiles in Courage. And we know that a guy named Ted Sorensen wrote it, who was also his speechwriter, one of his speechwriters.
And he got the Pulitzer.
family.
Okay.
Matrilineal side was Democratic and
My grandpa and grandma Eden in Cleveland were FDR Democrats. And they were very proud of John F. Kennedy.
Kennedy's problem to get elected was that he was Catholic.
Okay, we're going to talk about that. Why would you elect who was our only other Catholic president? Nobody. He's the first, not the first one to run, but he's the first person from the Catholic faith to be elected. And boy, you know, I gotta say, Nixon's people, sometimes Nixon was known for having some sneaky people around him. I don't know if you've ever heard that. They really tried to hammer Kennedy on this. And Kennedy came out and said, you know what, I respect the Pope. He's not gonna run this country, I am. Very, very clear on that fact. The Pope isn't gonna run this country, I am. And he wins. Close. It's the closest election in over 100 years. And he wins. Did any of you as young people get inspired by Kennedy and do anything?
I did.
Okay, good. Thank you, Talma. Okay. Gayla?
We had my dad and
You're not gonna see that until 1980. You're not gonna see that till 1980. You can be a liberal Republican or you can be a conservative Democrat at this time. Julie?
well, in the 1960s, the Democratic Party stood for the workers, the laborers.
Okay, so Julie says, I'm just gonna help these people out. Julie says, in the 1960s, the Democratic Party was the party of labor. Workers, okay?
And, well, okay, go on.
No, that's exactly right. Changed in 1964. JFK and the New Frontier. Here were his policies that he enacted. First, he increased the defense by 20%. That's not a democratic thing to do. he increases the defense budget by 20%. And he says Eisenhower has let us slip. Eisenhower is not building our defense. Eisenhower has turned to nuclear weapons as our defense, and they're cheap, relatively. We are putting our money into nuclear weapons. We need to be putting our money into soldiers and weapons and planes, and that is going to cost more money. No, that's not how it worked. To the moon. And Kennedy reprioritizes NASA's priorities. And now we begin a race to the moon. And who are we trying to beat? Do you guys remember the moon? Trying to beat Russia to the moon. Well, how hard were they trying to get to the moon?
They put a monkey up, didn't they?
They put a dog like they did put a monkey up. That space race is huge but costly. And so the thing we need to do is increase taxes. And that's a Democratic thing, right? That's what Democrats want to do, increase taxes, right?
No.
Kennedy saw it was 90% at the end of World War II. If you made a certain amount of money, you paid 90% in taxes. And Kennedy said, that's not working. And so he pushed through a tax cut, and they greatly reduced all of the levels of tax quite a ways down, and they began to collect more money. And that was Kennedy, a huge tax cut. Okay. Then he creates the Job Corps, or the Peace Corps. to win these conflicts that America's in everywhere is by winning the two things.
Hearts and minds of people.
Thank you. Winning the hearts and minds of the people. Exactly what he said. And so he starts the Peace Corps. Now, the Job Corps is a different thing, and it's still going strong today, which is for kids who have little to no interest in working academically, but have a lot of interest maybe in a vocational field, a technical field. And they go to a school where they don't have to learn English and history and a foreign language and that. They learn welding and machining and mechanics and woodworking and other things to prepare them for a job, and that's the Job Corps.
Okay, because they have the Job Corps thing over here by Pride, that's what I'm,
They did, but it's not Job Corps anymore.
okay.
It's not Job Corps anymore.
Is it, what's it called? Is it the?
Well,
it's,
College of Eastern Utah became USU Eastern, and they absorbed all of that, and now it's just part of USU Eastern. And if you've been watching, almost every year, where does the best welder in the United States and sometimes the best welder in the world come from? Right over there. That is because they incorporated what had been Job Corps into their program and then began to fund it better.
But it was very different back then, right? Because those young people would come there, they built Cedar Mountain, all of those recreation places out
They
there.
did, that's true. They put them to work on real jobs, doing real things.
Were they part of the CCC?
No, there was no more CCCs after 1941, 40. They were done with that. Maybe 42. I don't know. The man in charge of that named Sergeant Shriver.
No, really.
Some is-
Well, Kennedy, they like to go down on the beach and play a lot of football.
His brother-in-law.
That's his brother-in-law. And
His brother.
And Sergeant Shriver is his brother-in-law. Kennedy put in people he trusted. And he trusted Sergeant Shriver, and he put him in charge. He also got his other brother-in-law, Peter Lawford, an actor, if you remember him, to introduce him to Marilyn Monroe. You know, there was those kind of things too. Kennedy, mostly called Bobby Kennedy, as the Attorney General of the United States. And he gives him a few jobs. He says, the mafia is out of control. Stop the mafia. And segregation is going to kill this nation. We got to find some way to stop segregation. And so that's what Bobby Kennedy is kind of his main push as Attorney General. Today, this is illegal. You cannot name a relative to be anybody in your cabinet. It's against the law now. Kennedy would turn to Bobby for advice when he had more expert advisors in other things, but he listened to what Bobby had to say more than he listened to anybody else. And why not? Bobby had been a huge part of his campaign and helped him to win. And to be honest, JFK, John F. Kennedy, was smoother than Bobby. Bobby was smarter. He was the smart one. He really was. And he could read people, and he could twist arms and break legs if he needed to get the votes to come the way they were supposed to. And And Joe said, well, and when Kennedy came home as a war hero, when JFK came home as a war hero and ran for Congress, Joseph Kennedy, he ran from Brookline, Massachusetts, which includes Cambridge and a section just outside of Boston. And Joseph spent a lot of money to get his son elected, and not always on the up and up. But he didn't involve Kennedy in knowing what was happening there. But this young Kennedy, this war hero, wins by a landslide. And between the Attorney General and the President of the United States. The Attorney General has to be independent of the President. The President will appoint him, it'll be approved by Congress, but he should never talk to the Attorney General outside of cabinet meetings.
When did that change after?
It became more serious after this. Yeah, after this. It got real serious after Nixon, because Nixon crossed that line huge and leaned on George Mitchell, the Attorney General, during Watergate to not indict him. And he also leaned on the Attorney General's over the FBI, and he leaned on the FBI to not find evidence, and in fact to work to get rid of evidence. Nixon was being charged when he was headed to his crash with obstruction of justice, getting Kennedys were moving in. Eisenhower said to Kennedy, watch the CIA, they're not on your side. Well, the CIA came to Kennedy and said, we have a group of patriots, Cuban patriots, most of them from Florida, but from other places too, who want to go back and take Cuba away from Castro. And since 1958, we set this up during the Eisenhower administration, and we really didn't tell it. We set up training camps in Guatemala, and we've been preparing for an invasion of Cuba. And we're ready to go, Mr. President Kennedy. And Kennedy was still kind of wide-eyed and like, oh, that'd be cool. And in a matter of days, maybe hours. All we need is a go-ahead. And Kennedy said, this can't come back on the United States. So like the Cuban Air Force. So when those planes come flying in, they'll think it's their airplanes. He said, but one thing you need to know, we will not be using United States forces to make this a success. This has got to be Cuban forces. And the CIA said, don't worry, Mr. President, we won't need American forces. So the bombing started on April 15th. They came in, those planes messed up. The pilots trained by the CIA, there's a time difference between Guatemala and Cuba. And they didn't attack at the right time. But Castro had, you ready for this, how many soldiers he had ready to attack them, and in fact did attack them? He had 20,000 soldiers against their 1,400. It didn't take long for them to have to surrender. 100 were killed, a few got away, and 1,200 were captured. And it was a freaking disaster. Now, in the middle of this, as they start to lose, and as the CIA is monitoring it and sees that they're going to lose, they go into Kennedy and they say, we got to have the Air Force come and bomb them. If they can bomb Castro's soldiers, we can still win this. And Kennedy said, you mean American Air Force personnel do the bombing? And they said, yes, we've got to have it now. You got to save this. What do?
Ask Robert.
Robert may have given him some bad advice on this one. Wasn't always a good advice. Kennedy said, you promised me American personnel wouldn't be involved. This cannot be an American invasion. This has got to be Cubans invading back into their own country. This can't be an American. They wanted $53 million in baby food. And we gave it to them. And they released those a few at a time back to us.
Did we run out of baby food here?
No, no. And remember, we were not running out of babies either. We were still in the baby boom. We were still doing great. So we did get most of them back. A few died in prison from the wounds.
So we were the aggressors then.
We were the aggressors.
I always thought Cuba was attacking us.
No,
11 or 12. So.
Cuba was not attacking us.
Yeah.
But what did you say, most of them were Cubans?
Almost all of them had been Cuban and had escaped to America. When Castro took over, they took off.
Is there any significance to the name?
His name,
That's just his name, okay.
yeah, just his name.
Who were the pigs?
Were they real pigs?
They should name
I don't know.
Havana pigs?
Havana pig? No, I think they just, somebody had their pigs down there. I don't know.
So
I don't know.
that's just its name.
Just its name.
Okay,
Yeah, just, like we have like Dead Horse Point.
right, okay.
Mine was probably a dead horse then.
There was a dead horse there.
There was probably a bay of pigs.
That's right. I get it.
My dad was so scared. He had boxes of food sitting in our house ready to pick up and run. And I didn't know I was either 11 or 12 years old.
Well, and see, here's the problem. Who's Cuba's number one ally in all this? Russia.
Oh.
If America starts dropping soldiers in there, does Russia start dropping bombs? That's a pretty scary thing. Were any of you afraid of nuclear war when you were a kid?
Oh, yeah.
They trained us to be that way. Honestly, as a young man growing up, as a little boy and a young man, I knew how I was going to die. I had no doubts I was going to die in a nuclear war.
Under the table.
Hiding under my desk. Where are we supposed to go in Huntington? I learned this real young.
Down to the desert. Oh, what about the bomb shelter, the powder house down here, on the swell?
You mean the MK tunnels?
Yeah.
They were not, I lived in places, in Huntington, you were supposed to go to the high school, North Emory High School, and in the basement, they had blankets, they had food, they had all that stuff down there.
So the MK tunnels didn't come in during this time?
Yeah, they came in the 50s. And what the MK tunnels were about is the government wanted to build the Rocky Mountain Arsenal in Colorado and store nuclear weapons in there. But the question is, can Navajo sandstone take a direct hit and not cave in?
So it's SIT that's gonna put it here.
No, they weren't gonna put it here.
They want to test it here.
They needed to test it someplace that had Navajo sandstone.
Oh.
So they were gonna build it down there, and they came out and they tested it here. And my mom was 13, so that would have been 10, 14. That would have been 49,
I remember the big
1949.
mushroom cloud.
Yeah, and what they did is they simulated an atomic blast there. It wasn't a real atomic blast. They didn't have any nuclear material. They just piled up enough dynamite to make an atomic blast. And then they blew it up. And my grandpa took my mom and her sister, and they went on Little Cedar Mountain and watched it.
We watched it.
We watched it from the Blue Ridge.
You could see it all over the place. And that's where they went to see it, because Cedar Mountain kind of would hide it from Cleveland a little bit. So they went down there where you could see it, and you saw that part of it caved in. You've seen that if you've been to the MK tunnels. And I asked my dad one time, so can Navajo sandstone stand up to a nuclear blast? And he said, they built the Colorado Arsenal. They went ahead and built it. So apparently they learned enough from their tests here that they said, okay, it's worth it. And they did build it. So that's the story of MK Tunnels. Or as I like to call them, the blast holes. Anyway, it was always serious. I honestly knew how I was going to die. Isn't that terrible to say of like an 8, 9-year-old kid? He knows how he's going to die. And it was going to be a nuclear war.
Worried to death about how we're gonna get grandma and grandpa and get up to the mine.
Yep.
It's just a worrisome.
Here the mine was it. Orangeville, Castleton, the mine was it. Out in Nevada, where my family lived in the summers at Lehman Caves, now Great Basin National Park, the cave was. And they had blankets and food and fire-making supplies stored in that cave. And my dad took me back there one time, and we went back to where they had stored it. And it's not on the tour, you don't get to see it. You have to leave the tour and go back through a little place, and you can see all of this stuff stored there. And we have these all over America.
And it's just because
Why?
we're afraid of Russia? Is that what we stirred it all up?
Yeah,
We just-
but don't worry, it wouldn't be very many years, and China would have the nuclear bomb too. Then we could be worried about them too. And France. I don't trust those guys. Oh, no.
So you talk about Navajo sandstone.
Yes.
On the beaches.
We ate the peaches. For every 8 bottles of peaches, we had 11 people who wanted to eat them. So there weren't many. The Vienna Conference then takes place after the Bay of Pigs, June 4th, 1961. And the whole idea in Kennedy's mind is this is to lower tensions that are growing like crazy now with Russia claiming we invaded Cuba. We didn't. But that's what Russia's claiming, okay? And they meet, and everything I've ever read about this is Kennedy was unprepared. Kennedy got it handed to him by Khrushchev. Khrushchev was 60 years old. Kennedy was 44 by this time. He was 40. Great leader and a strong figure, and that Kennedy was a little wimp of a kid. And he came in, and where Kennedy wants to talk about calming relations, he said, okay, I guess it'll be nuclear war. And Kennedy comes back basically having his hat handed to him at this conference. But Kennedy was a lot of things. He wasn't stupid. And he learned from this. He learned how Khrushchev thought. He learned how things worked. That's in June. By August, they start building the Berlin Wall. Khrushchev gives permission. The East German government is begging, let us build a wall. They were losing in 1961 1,000 escapees from East Germany. The rest of it over 70 miles around West Berlin until West Berlin is totally surrounded by this wall. And it continued to grow through the 60s, through the 70s, through the 80s, until they made sure there was a no man's land that you had to run through to get. To kill her. And we estimate that around 200 people over the next 20 some years would die trying to escape, would die. And we know that there were still several hundred who made the escape, but we also know there were more that were captured before they could escape or weren't killed. So this becomes the symbol of Soviet oppression of its people and of East German communist oppression. Yes.
Have you watched that movie Night Crossing? It's about the people that build the parachute, not parachute, but the hot air balloon.
I did watch that quite a long time ago.
It's
And in return, cut the tariff on American goods. And Europe becomes a great market, especially for our farmers, for us to sell to Europe, okay? And then he says to the EEC, the European Economic Community, they were called, the common market, to accept Great Britain. Great Britain had applied to become part of that. Well, de Gaulle is going to show Kennedy. And all because Kennedy's wife was prettier than his wife. I mean, that's just the fact. No, that's not why he did it. De Gaulle opposes the United States at every single step. If we say we're going to lower tariffs, France, you lower tariffs, he raised tariffs. He opposed us on everything we did. And France vetoed Britain's entry into the European Economic Community, the common market. They had veto power and vetoed it. And they got Germany, West Germany then, to back them up. Very, very frustrating. France had joined NATO, but they wouldn't participate with us. NATO built their No, we're not going to do that. And France refused. They said, we'll train on our own. We'll develop our own weapon systems. We'll be in NATO, but you're not going to tell us what to do. And it was a terribly frustrating time for President Kennedy. And it was a kind of a happy time for Khrushchev, because he felt NATO would eventually fall apart with people like de Gaulle in there. Now that didn't happen, but it was hard. Kennedy wanted to see the United States and France agree on policy, and de Gaulle was very much in opposition to that.
Why? De Gaulle was a war hero. We were on the same side in World War II.
He was a war hero. He was on our side. We provided him with weapons. And de Gaulle never felt he got the credit for freeing France. And they should be up here. It should be Soviet Union, United States, France. And they were being assigned to be in that second tier. And they didn't like it. Especially de Gaulle and his monstrous-sized ego didn't like it. And he was having his own problems in places like Vietnam. He was fighting since in the 1950s. France was fighting in Vietnam, and Algeria, where they were fighting until the 60s in Algeria. The French Foreign Legion were fighting in Algeria. So that's pretty much de Gaulle and his huge, giant ego. Thank you, Bridges.
What is that?
It's about, it takes place in West Berlin.
And what's the
Bridge of Spies. Okay. In 1961, Kennedy makes a fateful decision. The CIA has come to him and said, we need more troops in Vietnam. South Vietnam. They are, unless they're shot at. And some of them take advantage of that and try to get shot at. But they're supposed to just be advisors to the ARVN, the South Vietnamese Army, to prop them up and keep Diem in power.
How many were already advisors were there before the 500 more were there?
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure, a few thousand. But Kennedy makes a conscious decision to begin stepping this up. He's going to change his mind, by the way. Well, not in time. Then we face the Cuban Missile Crisis. Once again now, Kennedy and Khrushchev They never see each other during this. Comes on the news. Do any of you remember this? Yes.
Yeah.
I don't, I was too young. But he came on and said, they're moving missiles into Cuba. The Russians are. They can strike Washington DC in 8 minutes. I didn't remember seeing it, but
I did.
he put up charts. This was one of the charts they held up. They would also use that at the UN to show it. And he tells the American people, it looks like nuclear war. Now, did any of you get upset or worried or panic? Atomic weapons raining down on you. So, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy meets with the Soviet ambassador. Is that the Attorney General's job, really? No. Anatoly Dobrynin, and they meet privately and they work out a deal. But that's not with Khrushchev, that's with Dobrynin, their ambassador to the United States. On October 28th, Khrushchev pens an open letter to President Kennedy and tells Kennedy, I'm going to remove the missiles. And there's a big concern. Which letter do we read? And Bobby tells JFK, just ignore the first letter. Just go with the second letter and ignore the first letter. hearing what you want to hear more than what they're. And hidden diplomacy. There is a Kevin Costner movie, by the way, called 13 Days that goes through this whole thing.
Then they put up Navy put up a blockade.
We did. When their ships were coming over, we sent our Navy out and blockaded them from coming in. And Khrushchev said, this is an act of war. And Kennedy said, no, it's not, it's just a blockade. 13 Days. That's a good movie to watch. Kevin
You call it
Costner.
a quarantine instead of a blockade,
Yeah, he called it a quarantine, not a blockade.
so you can try to get around that.
Oh, yeah. That just like Vietnam was a police action. We never arrested anybody. Those missiles aimed at us. They were getting old and we were glad to get them out of there. And we were creating a new generation of missiles. ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, that could hit Moscow from Arizona in 30 minutes. They flew up into outer space, came down and could hit Moscow in 30 minutes. So we didn't need the Jupiter missiles there, but us taking them out gave Khrushchev some credibility. Okay? And that ends that huge crisis. And now it's time to quit.
So when was it Khrushchev was pounding his shoe on?
That, he went to the UN and you got to know, he was so inexperienced in foreign affairs. But as time went on, boy, he became sharp. Had he lived, he would have been the force in the world to reckon with, because he had learned how diplomacy works. He really had.
Well, he's the most loved president there ever was. Maybe Reagan might.
My most loved president.
Mine was.
My most loved president. Mine too.
I really liked his wife.
I think he was.
Yeah. And she was a beautiful woman.
She was a beautiful, elegant woman, and she is the reason that I wanted to grow up to become a Greek millionaire.
She.
But there were only two things that stopped me from doing it too. I'm not Greek and I don't have any money. So, thank you. Thank you all. We'll see you next meeting. Hi, we're closing up now.
Well,